Hello and welcome to Patterns 101. My name's Abby here at DIY Fashion Rebel, and in this video I really want to help you learn the basics of using sewing patterns. That way you can get started with confidence, okay? Because the truth is, sewing patterns were created at a time when people were sewing their own clothes. And so the patterns assume that you already have some basic understanding of how to sew clothing. And for most of us, that's not the case. So I hope that this video is going to fill in that gap. So that way, when you do start reading a pattern, you will have that base knowledge that you need to actually start digging into it and not just feeling super lost and confused. Okay? So let's dig in. The first question is, what is a pattern? Now, a pattern is a paper template that we're going to use to make clothing. And these templates are basically outlines of our clothing, okay? So for example, we can see Autumn here wearing this gray V-neck. And if I trace around her V-neck here at this pink line, okay, you can see that same curve happening on our paper template, okay? And then I can go down the shoulder seam, and again, we see it here, and I can just trace all the way around, and you can see all these same shapes on the paper pattern on the right, okay? And that's really what a pattern is. It's these traces or templates of our clothing. And then what we can do is take these templates, trace them onto fabric, and create clothing. How cool is that? So just to take this a step further so you can see the whole picture, we're gonna keep going with this example, okay? So here again is the paper template we saw on the last slide, and you see that pink outline. Now, if I took this template and I cut it out, okay, and then I trace this pink line that we see onto fabric, I would end up with this, okay? So here I have a piece of fabric cut out in this shape. Perfect. Now I'm going to trace the same pattern piece, but I'm going to use the taller line, and you can see it traced out here in blue. So what I'm using, I'm tracing this higher line that says back right here, okay? And when I do that, if I cut it out, if I trace it the blue outline on fabric, I end up with this piece, okay? You can just kind of see it peeking out from behind the pink outline. Now, to give you a real world example of what this looks like, here's a t-shirt, okay? Here's the pink outline, here's the blue outline. The back of your shirt is behind the front. So when you sew it together, you're not going to see very much of the back if you're looking at the front. Okay? So this is the same thing. Imagine if we had cut this white fabric out, it would be the exact same as the shirt in red that we see here. Okay? So now we're going to cut out the sleeve. There's our trace. We put it on, and we have a t-shirt. How crazy is that? You didn't have to design anything. You just picked up a paper template, traced it onto fabric, and sewed it together, okay? That's the beauty of sewing patterns. You don't have to make these templates. Someone else already did that for you, okay? So you might be asking, Abby, you have half a t-shirt. Where's the other half? Are there more pattern pieces? And the answer is no, there are no more pattern pieces, but there is a trick to this, okay? So if we go back to this slide, okay, and we're asking, where's the other half? We only have half of a t-shirt here. What we want to look at is this little area. And if I zoom in, you can see it says the word fold, and that word is written right down the center line of our t-shirt. Now on a pattern, you may see the word fold, or you may see this symbol, okay? And both of these mean the same thing. And what it means is it wants you to fold your pattern along that line. So what that looks like is this, okay? So here we have our original outline that we've been talking about. Now, if I take this pattern piece and I just flip it over, okay, I flip it along this center line, then I create a mirror image of this exact same pattern piece, and now I have both the left and the right side. Super cool, right? Okay, so now I can do the same thing. So I trace out this pink line, I flip my pattern piece over, I trace the left side, and then I can cut this whole piece out of fabric. I do the same thing with the back and the sleeves, and then I can just follow the instructions inside the pattern envelope and create a t-shirt. How cool! That's why patterns are so flipping amazing, because you don't have to design this, okay? You can just pick a pattern that you think looks awesome and you can follow the instructions. You trace the template, you follow the instructions, and you create clothing. You don't have to understand how to design clothing. You don't have to understand how to create all this from scratch, okay? You can start designing beautiful clothing like that once you start reading sewing patterns, okay? So now that we've talked about what a sewing pattern is and where the other half is, because I know that's a big question I've been asked a lot. So you just fold it over. The next thing that I want to talk about is the first couple of steps that you need to prepare for your sewing pattern project. When you go to the fabric store and you're going through the pattern catalog, you're going to see something that looks like this. It's going to have a picture of what you're creating with that pattern, okay? So in this pattern, we're making kind of a loose fit prairie dress, would be how I describe it. So on the front, you're going to have the sketch or photo of the design, which we see here. You're also going to see the brand, which this one is Simplicity, and you're going to see the pattern number. Now, the brand and the pattern number are important if you want to ask for help or you want to look up this pattern online, okay? These two pieces of information used together are the unique name of this specific pattern, okay? So once you put these together, when I say Simplicity 1939, if I put that in Google, it's gonna find this exact pattern. That way, if you ever need to look it up or tell someone else what pattern you're working on, those two pieces of information are what you're going to need to share with them, okay? And the last thing is the pattern size. Now up here in the corner, you can see that this is a European size 32 to 40 or a US size 6 to 14. Now you want to make sure that you get the pattern size that's right for you and your body, okay? So that's one more key piece of information that you're going to want to check, okay? So that's the front, pretty straightforward. The back is where people get a little bit nervous. Now, don't get nervous, okay? Take a deep breath. Now, I am going to talk through all of this, and it's going to be a lot of information. Feel free to re-watch this a couple of times until it sinks in, but just a word of advice to help you feel more confident. After you do this 4 or 5 or 6 times, once you read the back of this happens very quickly, okay? I've been sewing for a long time, and after my first 10 patterns or so, I could read the back of the pattern envelope in about a minute or 2, okay? So it looks like a lot of information, but I promise it gets really easy once you understand what all of this means, okay? So let's dig in. So the first thing we have over here on the left side are the line drawings. Now these are just the same pictures we saw on the front, these same pictures, but without all the pretty details, without the colors and the paint and like the person actually wearing it. This is what that looks like with just simple lines so you can see the pieces of this outfit, okay? And you can see here that we have variation A, B, and C. So this pattern actually gives you 3 different options, okay? You're not making just one thing. You could make a full-length dress with full-length sleeves, that's version A, or you could do full length but without sleeves, which is my personal favorite, that's variation B. And then you have variation C, which is shorter, and the sleeves are also a little bit shorter, and they have these little ties on the end, okay? So inside of this pattern, there are 3 variations, and we can see them listed here, A, B, and C. If we move over to this larger chunk of information, the first thing we see up here, pointed out by number 2, is recommended fabrics. And this makes life much easier because instead of having to figure out, oh, I want to make this dress like we saw in the picture, but what fabric do I use for this? The pattern tells you, okay? And yes, there's a lot of fabrics listed here, and yes, you may not know most of these, but usually there's 1 or 2 you may be familiar with. Cotton is really common for a lot of projects. And even if you're not familiar with these names, what you can do is walk around the fabric store and see if it's divided by sections. A lot of them are. And a lot of them will have a section for cotton, and a section for linen, and a section for rayon. Then all you have to do is find a word on here. For example, crepe de chine. Crepe de chine is nice. For example, crepe de chine, and then you can walk around and see if you find a section called crepe de chine. If you don't see any labels anywhere, the next thing you can do is ask an associate. Tell them or show them, this is the pattern I'm making. Can you help me pick a fabric? Or tell them which fabric on here. I'm looking for crepe de chine. And they can typically help you find that fabric, okay? Really, it's as easy as that. And I know picking fabric can feel really confusing, but just follow the recommended fabrics and your project is going to turn out beautifully, okay? Now, once we move past suggested fabrics, we come down to number 3, which is notions. And that's just a fancy word for sewing supplies. So these are the supplies that you're going to need to make this pattern. So for this, we are going to need thread, which is pretty much every project. We are going to need a 1 invisible 9-inch zipper, which again, if you're not sure what that is, you can ask an associate, and 3 small snaps, okay? Pretty easy. So once you walk around the fabric store and get those supplies together, the next thing that we're going to look at is the body measurements, okay? So that's this section. Now, this is where having your body measurements comes in handy, okay? If you haven't taken your body measurements yet, check the link in the description and you can find a link to my measurements workshop where I walk you through how to take all of your measurements, easy peasy, okay? And you can get it for free. Check the link in the description. I have all the details there, okay? But for now, we're just gonna move forward pretending like we already have these measurements, okay? So you're going to look at each one and find your measurements. So for mine, 34 bust, 28 waist, 40 hip, and 16 and something for the back, neck to waist, okay? And you can see that my sizes go all over. They're not in one nice column. That is really common. I have never talked to anyone who has fallen into one column. So if your numbers are all over the place, that's totally normal, okay? Everyone is all over the chart. So just find your numbers without judgment, and you're going to look for which one is the largest size. So for me, that is my hip measurement. So if I look at that one and I look straight down the column, then I can see here that for this pattern size, my pattern size is a size 16 or 42 in European, okay? So now I'm going to look straight down in this green column like I have here for the size 16. Now, I need to figure out which variation I'm going to be making of this dress, A, B, or C, because the amount of fabric that I need is different depending on which variation I make. So for this example, let's do variation C, okay? This one, the shorter one down here at the bottom. So if I look at this, I can see that here's dress A, here's dress B, and here's dress C. So since I decided for this example that we'll do dress C, we're gonna look across this purple row, okay? So now we're gonna use this green column coming down, and again, that's our largest size on the measurement chart. And then which variation we're gonna make, the purple, and wherever those two cross each other, right here, where I've circled in red, okay? That is the amount of fabric we need to make this project, okay? Now, there are two numbers here, and if we look at the front of this purple column, we see that it says 45 inches star star and 60 inches star star. And that's because most fabric comes in either 45 inches wide or 60 inches wide, okay? So once you figure out how much you need and you have found your fabric, so for mine, we're gonna do crepe de chine, and then I bring it up to the associate and I'm like, I need you to cut, or could you please cut, that's nicer, could you please cut X amount of fabric. Before you say that, you need to ask them, how wide is this fabric? Now it may be written on the fabric itself, but more often than not, I just ask them to measure it for me. So I'd ask them, how wide is this? They would measure it. They say, oh, it's 45 inches. And then you could say with confidence, oh, then could you please cut me 3 and 5/8, sorry, it's very small on my screen, but 3 and 5/8 yards of fabric, okay? Guys, that is how you read the back of a pattern envelope, and that is how you get all of your supplies together using this information, okay? Sewing Patterns have literally given you all the information you need. It's just that when we first pick up a pattern, we don't know how to read it, which is fair. I had no idea how to read it. Like, it's not intuitive, it's not spelled out for you. It can feel very confusing. So I hope that by walking through the front and the back of the envelope, you now see how once you pick a pattern, it's literally just a matter of following this step-by-step through to get your supplies together, to get your fabric, your notions, and get everything so you can start this project and know you have everything you need to finish it properly. How exciting! Okay, so the last thing on here is final measurements. And honestly, I've rarely looked at this section, okay? So yes, it is useful, but we're not going to go into it in depth here because it's not so much for when you're just getting started, okay? So now that we have talked about what a pattern is, how it turns into clothing, where the other half is, and we've talked about how to prepare for your pattern project, the last thing I want to talk with you about is what do you do once you get the pattern home? What are your first steps once you open that pattern envelope, okay? So let's see what that looks like. Inside of your pattern envelope, you have the pattern, which is this like kind of tannish tissue paper material that you see in the back with all the lines on it. and you have the instructions, okay? And then obviously the pattern envelope that it all came in. Now, the first thing on your pattern instructions is going to be the line drawings again that we already saw on the back of the pattern envelope, and this list of all the pattern pieces that are inside of your pattern envelope. So if I zoom in on this, let's continue with our variation C example, okay? So again, we're making dress C. Beautiful, so exciting. Now, we're gonna look over at this big list of pieces, okay? I know they're kind of funny shapes, but the more that you sew, the more familiar these pieces will look to you. But for now, let's look at piece number 1, okay? Has this number 1 inside of it. And if we look down at this list, we also see the number 1. And that means that these two relate together. So piece 1 is the bodice front. And bodice is just a fancy way of saying like the part that covers your chest, like the main part of the top. So number 1 is bodice front. Number 2 that we see here is the bodice back. Number 3 is the sleeve. And you can read through all of these, okay? This is just an index of the 12 pieces that are included in your pattern. You can see the shape here, and you can see the name down here. Now, why this is important is because for each variation, you're not going to use all 12 pieces, okay? There's some pieces for A, some pieces for B, and some pieces for C. But how do you know which ones are for your variation? It's actually really easy, okay? So if we look down here at the name again, so we have number 1, and we have bodice back. Right after the name of the piece, we have these 3 letters, A, B, and C. That means piece 1, the bodice front, is used in variation A, variation B, and variation C. So what we need to do is look through this list and find which pieces have the letter C after them. And those are all the pieces we need for variation C to make that dress. So pause the video and find which pattern pieces we need to make variation C. I'm serious, pause it. Did you find them all? If you paused it and you found all the numbers, it should look something like this, okay? So for making variation C, we need pieces 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, and 12, okay? And then also you can look at this and try to find those shapes on your pattern. It might make finding them a little bit easier, okay? So now that we have opened our pattern envelope, we took the instructions out, and we know which pieces we need to cut out, now we need to go and cut them out. But so far, we know which pieces to cut, but we don't know which size to cut. So, for example, if we look at piece 2 here, okay, that is the bodice back. Now, I found the bodice back on my pattern, okay, right here, number 2, and you can see there's a number again, number 2, and you can see the name here, bodice back. And this shape looks just like the picture we had here. Easy, right? Okay, so now I know that I need to cut out piece 2, but if I zoom in down here, you can see all of these lines. And then I see down here I have numbers 6, 8, 10, 12, and 14. Where did all these numbers come from? If we scroll back, here. What size is this pattern? 6, 8, 10, 12, and 14. Okay? So you can make this dress in any of these sizes. And how they do that is what I just showed you. Is you have all of these lines going along piece number 2. Okay? So once you get your pattern home and you open it, you're gonna look at the pattern instructions and you're gonna find which pieces you need to cut out for your variation. Then you're going to find that piece and you're going to cross-reference it with your measurements chart on the back of your pattern envelope. When you're cutting out your pattern pieces, you need this piece from the instructions and you need this piece from the back of the pattern envelope. Is this making a little more sense for you? I hope that with this information, you're going to feel more confident and more excited to start your first sewing pattern project. Now, I do want to give you one more piece of information because it's really important, but I don't have time to go in depth with it today because it is a little bit technical, okay? So something that we saw on our pattern here is that we talked about already is that your measurements are unlikely to fit in one column. You're probably going to be all over the place. Now the problem is the pattern is made for just one column, okay? So this dress is made for someone who is a 38 bust, a 30 waist, a 40 hip, and a 16 and whatever that is for the back, neck to waist measurement, okay? But clearly I'm not those measurements. My bust and waist and back to neck aren't the same. So I'm going to need to adjust these measurements and make them smaller so they actually fit on my body. And when you do that, when you make adjustments to your pattern to work on your body, it's called fit adjustments, okay? And fit adjustments, they're a little bit tricky, but you can definitely do them. You just need to learn how. I do have a class where I walk through how to make a basic stretch t-shirt. And in that class, I explain how to make these 3 main types of fit adjustments that you need to get your project to fit 90% perfect, okay? And a t-shirt is a great me-made staple, which is why I teach fit adjustment in that class, because you not only learn how to fit, you also end up with a lot of new sewing skills and having a me-made t-shirt. And who doesn't have t-shirts in their closet, right? The reason that I teach those skills inside of the class is because I find for most people, if you're learning how to do fit just by reading a blog post, it can be really confusing. It's much easier if I can walk through the process with you. And of course, in my class, I do a lot of live workshops. So if you're interested, there is information for you down below to join one of my classes. But if you don't want to take a class with me and you want to do it on your own, then I at least want to give you the words that you need to Google to find these fit adjustments, okay? So those fit adjustments are grading, height adjustment, and a full bust adjustment. Now grading is how you actually adjust between sizes, like what I just showed you here. If I want to make this fit between a size 12, then a 14, then a 16, then back down to a 12, that's done through grading, okay? And height adjustment, a pattern is made for a specific height. Typically, it's like 5 foot 5 inches. So if you are shorter than that or taller than that, you're going to need to make a height adjustment. And finally, this is just for women, but if your cup size is a C cup or bigger, then you are also going to need to make a full bust adjustment because that's what adjusts a top to fit around your beautiful chest, okay? So guys, that is really the basic intro that you need to start your first pattern project, okay? Once you have this information, it's just a matter of digging in, reading the instructions, and learning how clothes go together. And every pattern is a little different. So it's always going to be a new adventure, but this is going to be a great starting point for you. So I hope that you learned a ton, and good luck on your first pattern project.